data. The funny thing about it is there's lots out there, but unless you go about collecting it, collating it, and organizing it, it's just a whole mess of stuff. But that stuff, when you organize it in a coherent way, will actually provide you with some pretty cool insights. And it's collecting that information, knowing where to collect it, and the different types of data is what this video is all about. So that's what we're going to have a look at, collecting data and how to make sense of it. And this is all in within the context of urban cycling infrastructure. So when you're collecting your data, it's really important to think about what am I collecting this for? So that you remain on task, write a simple checklist. Maybe you need to identify current patterns in urban cycling infrastructure. You're looking at how urban cycling infrastructure is used, possibly. So really look at the specifics of the task. What are the objectives? What should you be looking for? Provide yourself with a checklist. Write it out step by step and relate that back to the specifics of the task. Now, one thing that might be really handy when you're working on a project that looks at urban cycling infrastructure in a particular area is a city. Now, maps is a map rather, not a city. So within a city is a map. So maps provide us with a good overview of a general area. So here we've got a topographic map on the left, and on the right we've got a thematic map. So it's a satellite image with bike racks proposed and also existing bike racks in Port Macquarie identified. So maps, you can also use spatial technology. So Google Earth, Google Maps might also become really important. So if you're looking at cycling infrastructure or areas where there could be cycling infrastructure implemented, maps are going to be really important. So looking at current infrastructure, there might be tracks identified on a topographic map. There might be areas on satellite images. It's not technically a map, but also would be really useful to collect information. Field sketch. So again, you might be able to take a photograph, you might be able to take a range of photographs, but annotating a field sketch or having an annotated field sketch is a really good way of collecting information. You're out in the field, you're observing data, you're observing cycling trends, you're noting that people tend not to cycle in a particular area. Draw the outline, draw a field map, draw a sketch map, annotate, write on why, write your observations, detail it, scroll all over it, write that information on, and the combination of the visual and the written will provide you with really good source of information when you get back to class, when you get back to wherever it is you bring all that information together. So a field sketch or a field drawn map with annotations will provide you with a really good amount of information. GPS. So GPS, here we can see satellite image, obviously taken from Google Earth. Now GPS, you might note particular locations, you might note down areas that have significant issues with cycling infrastructure, you might note down a track or trail that's designed for cycling but may not be all that useful. So combining those GPS tracks, known as .gpx files, with Google Earth, then making clear observations, annotations, maybe noting some observations about those cycling infrastructure can be really useful. So that's collecting the data, getting back to the office, getting back to the classroom, using Google Earth, uploading the information, looking at trends, data and information. That sort of stuff will provide you with really insightful sources of information that you can actually make evaluations and then provide your recommendations. The next, somewhat related to GPS photography. So again, taking photographs of cycling infrastructure, what's in place already, or areas that might be, a good place where specific infrastructure could be implemented. Your camera will be a really useful resource. So, as mentioned in a previous video, some cameras have a geotagging capability, which means once you upload it, to Google Photos and then to Google Maps, your photos will be automatically placed on the map where you took it based upon latitude and longitude. That's really cool and really helpful for when it comes time to collecting and collating that information and data. The next one's an interesting one. So GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems. One particular piece of software that's used, so browser software that has all sorts of data, all sorts of information, particularly focusing on cycling, but also running as well, and foot traffic, is Strava. Now, Strava it's kind of like a social network for athletes, and people upload their rides, they upload their GPS data, not only where they went, but also their speeds, how fast they traveled over a particular area, times of day, etc., etc. And lots of this information you can gather by looking at Strava. Now, you don't have to create a Strava account to access this information. If you simply look at Strava Labs, which is a little project that Strava is working on, they're looking at communicating heaps and heaps of relevant information that might be of use to you. The top right here, we can see a map of Port Macquarie, and it shows the changes in usage of particular roads, tracks, and trails in the surrounding area from the years 2014 to 2015. So the different colours indicate different years. And we can see that in 2015 there were some new areas that weren't previously used by cyclists, notably Sovereign Hills. What that suggests? Well, that suggests that if we take into account our own understanding, our own knowledge of that particular area, that these roads didn't exist prior to 2015. So, also looking for patterns in usage. If you are tasked with identifying areas that need to be improved in terms of cycling infrastructure, what areas are heavily used by cyclists already? So, making observations based upon data and information. Have a good look at Strava Labs. There's some really useful resources, including what's called the Global Heat Map. And you'll see areas have a darker colour where more people use that particular road or track. Another way to collect information, a really good way to collect information, is just by simply designing a survey. Now, surveys can have questions that are designed to collect either qualitative or quantitative data. Now, qualitative data might be in the form of a question that requires an answer that's more, I guess, you can't really count it. If you're talking about a question might be, describe your patterns of usage in terms of cycling. And what you're looking for there is a question or an answer that might be a paragraph long. The person might go on to talk about how they might use it in recreation, they might commute once or twice, but really they don't use it all that much. Whereas a quantitative question might say, in terms of cycling usage, how many times per week would you ride your bike? And you have options of 0, 1 to 2, 3 to 4, or 5 or more. And where you're giving them options and you can actually count, you can quantify the data that you collect, that's an example of a quantitative data question and quantitative data. So a mixture of both is probably the best method, and surveys, essentially asking people their opinions or their patterns of use if you're looking at cycling, or areas they might use. Surveys are really great ways that you can collect information. You can do this by simply asking people. You can hand out physical copies of surveys, paper copies, or Google Forms and SurveyMonkey are great ways to generate lots of information by simply getting people to fill in online surveys. So both of these options are really good. Now, secondary sources. Maybe someone has already collected some data and information. Having a look at secondary sources, what information they offer, is a good thing if you can find a relevant secondary source. So this one here, it's a collection of information displayed in an infographic about Australians' patterns of usage in terms of cycling. How often, how many bikes are out there, what people do when they're on a bike, whether it's for recreation or commuting. So secondary sources, something that you didn't collect yourself, are also really great tools and will provide you with lots of data and information. So there's some things you can use to collect and look at specific data related to urban cycling infrastructure. That's a short list. You might find some other things that might also be really useful as well, but including primary and secondary sources of data.